Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy, and specifically to talk about the continued increase in drone attacks on Russian oil and gas facilities. If you've been following the channel, you'll know I recently posted a video where we went through all of the attacks that Ukraine have launched on Russian oil facilities since the start of August. And there's been a real ramping up because President Zelensky has come out and said that he believes that one of the best forms of sanctions against Russia is to attack its oil and gas, because that's where it's earning around 25 to 30% of total revenue. And in this video, which is shorter than normal, I wanted to talk about news that's just been released about attacks on two of the biggest Russian oil facilities in Tuapse and Novorossiysk. And the latest news reports say that the facilities have now been paralyzed. And this is major news because these ports process up to 2 million barrels per day of Russian oil. Now, if we have a look at the details on what we've got here, you can see that Novorossiysk actually has a capacity of 750,000 barrels per day. That's around $60 million of revenue to Russia that's going out through that port. And that oil is being exported predominantly to China, India, Turkey, some European Union countries via the CPC. So this is basically where a lot of the oil that's going to India and China and Turkey, who we talked about, is a member of NATO and has been told directly by Donald Trump to stop buying Russian oil. This is where it's being processed. Now, the Tuapse facility is actually larger in terms of its potential capacity. It can process up to 1.1 million barrels per day. However, the volumes that are going through that port at the moment are much lower. It's around about 260,000 barrels per day, which equates to around $21 million per day for Russia. And that oil is primarily going to China, India, and Turkey. So same destination as the previous port. And combined total, we're talking about over 1 million barrels of oil per day that are the confirmed flows at the moment. But the potential here is that it could be up to 2 million barrels. So the loss of revenue by having to close these ports as a result of the drone attacks, and these drone attacks were reported to have been marine drone attacks. So rather than being airborne, they've come on the water, which I think are more difficult to actually intercept. If you've seen some of the videos that I posted, I showed some of those marine drones. They're basically like remote controlled boats that can move very fast through the water, but they're relatively small and can hold a lot of explosives. So they're hard to track, they're hard to hit, and if they do hit their target, they can cause a lot of damage because they're coming in the water. So the loss of income is around about $90 million per day from Russia's perspective. And also what this is going to affect, obviously, is the transfer of that oil to the destinations that need it. So the Chinese and Indian refineries that are buying a lot of Russian oil, obviously, are going to see the deliveries falling because they won't actually be able to make them. So there's a knock-on implication in terms of the buyers. China and India may decide that if they're going to see disrupted flows, that they need to start thinking about sourcing from elsewhere. And obviously, this is on top of the combined pressure of the sanctions. And India at the moment is facing a 50% tariff for all of its exports into the USA as a result of the fact that Donald Trump said that he was applying a penalty because of the continued purchases from Russia. And in terms of what the impact of this is going to be on the Russian economy, well, there's multiple different factors to take into account. Clearly, there's the loss of revenue that we've just talked about, potentially 90 million at the moment. But if more flow was to go through these ports, that could get up to as much as $180 million per day. So we are talking tens of billions of dollars per year if this is to go on for a prolonged period of time. There's also the strain that this is now going to place on alternative ports and pipelines, because if Russia can't use these facilities, it's then going to have to try to move some of the oil to other facilities. So that's going to put additional strain on those and possibly could cause them to become overloaded and have logistical problems there. We've got the supply chain and logistical issues that Russia is now facing in terms of satisfying all of its orders. So it's got this huge order book from China and India. if these ports are now out of action for a prolonged period of time, clearly they're not going to be able to deliver on those orders. That could potentially mean that Russia faces penalties or even loses future purchasing from India and China. We've got the impact on the local economy and labour, because if these facilities are closed for a prolonged period, then the workers may get told not to come to work, they might not get paid. And we've talked previously about the multiplier effect and the negative multiplier. So if people aren't working, if they're not being paid, then they're not spending at the stores. Those stores aren't making the revenue. So they then therefore may need to lay people off. If you've got a coffee shop, for example, that's down at the port, and if that port is no longer open for a week or 2 weeks, then that coffee shop might have to shut as well. All those workers get laid off, then they're not spending. And this can quickly multiply into a major problem in the local area. And there's also now an issue with regards to insurance, because if there's a big insurance claim that's placed on the Russian insurers as a result of this, then they may need to increase their premiums, charge more because they're having to pay out, their costs are increasing. And so there's an overriding increase in general costs, as well as the repair costs of actually fixing all of the damage and trying to get these facilities back up and running. So there are going to be multiple implications on the Russian oil industry and also Russian revenue and what's going on in the wider economy as a result of these attacks. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this short video giving you an up-to-the-minute update on what's going on with regards to these drone attacks, because what we've seen over the past couple of months is a ramping up from Ukraine's perspective, targeting oil and gas facilities in Russia, because this realistically is the best way to get the message through that Ukraine wants this war to end. Russia is reliant on its oil and gas revenues. We talked about that in previous videos. As much as 25 to 30% of all of the revenue is coming in from that source. So if Ukraine can cut off the actual distribution, the ports and where these actual oil is being loaded onto tankers, then that's obviously going to disrupt both the supply of oil and also the cash that's coming in for Russia. So Ukraine has decided to do this over the past couple of months. It's being effective. It's having an impact on Russia already. And I think these two latest strikes show just how serious Ukraine is in cutting off that supply of revenue. Now, we've already talked about the fact that Russia is struggling right now in terms of its economy. It's been using the National Wealth Fund to continue funding the war. And if it starts to lose more revenue from oil and gas, then that's going to cause serious problems, because the wealth fund is already severely depleted. It can't keep funding the war forever. And if Russia is losing its day-to-day revenue from being able to sell oil, then that's going to cause more problems in terms of how does it keep funding the war, and potentially could mean that we get to a situation where Russia has to make a decision as to whether or not it can afford to keep with this offensive. And of course, the other issue here is that China and India are reliant upon the flow of this oil. So when they see a port being hit and they lose that flow of oil, they need to decide whether or not they're going to wait for Russia to fulfill those orders, or if they just go and buy that crude oil in the open market from somebody else, because India and China are putting this oil through their refineries. They're doing that to firstly feed themselves, but also to sell the refined products into the international markets. They're both selling gasoline and diesel and other refined products to make a profit. So if they can't get the crude oil from Russia, it makes sense that they would get it from somewhere else. And also, there's no risk in buying it from other countries that are not sanctioned. So the overall summary of today's video is that the impact of these latest attacks is going to reduce the revenue that Russia is earning and potentially could have a long-lasting damaging impact on the oil industry in Russia and Russia's ability to be able to continue selling to China and India. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, then please give me a thumbs up, like this video, pass a comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, because I'm looking to increase my subscriber base. So please hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. And thanks so much to everyone supporting me, either through Buy Me a Coffee, YouTube Super Thanks, Patreon, YouTube membership, or Buy Me a Coffee membership. Thank you for that support. And here's something to put a smile on your face.